Syria's Prime Minister announced today that most cabinet ministers had returned to work following the overthrow of President Bashar al-Assad. Though some state employees failed to resume their duties, a United Nations official reported that the country's public sector had experienced a complete and abrupt halt. Meanwhile, streams of refugees returned to Syria from neighboring countries seeking peace and searching for relatives lost during Assad's oppressive rule. Challenges already loom for the rebel alliance, now controlling much of Syria, led by Ahmad al-Sharaa, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Golani, a former senior al-Qaeda figure who severed ties with the group years ago. The alliance has promised representative governance and religious tolerance. Today, the rebel leadership issued a statement vowing not to interfere with women's dress, stating it's strictly forbidden to impose any requests related to women's clothing or appearance. 2 days after the rebels took Damascus, government services remain largely inactive as many state workers ignored calls to return. This disruption impacted key areas such as airports and border operations, slowing humanitarian aid efforts. Al-Sharaa held his first meeting with Prime Minister Mohammad Ghazi Jalali, who had remained in Syria after Assad fled to Russia. In a video shared on social media, Al-Sharaa expressed confidence in the rebels' capabilities, stating, "You will see there are skills among the rebels." Israel, meanwhile, confirmed airstrikes on suspected chemical weapons sites and long-range missile facilities to prevent their seizure by extremist groups. Additionally, Israeli forces temporarily seized a buffer zone in Syria following the withdrawal of Syrian troops. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar emphasized the country's focus on national security, while reports suggested the strikes targeted weapons depots and defense infrastructure. In northern Syria, Turkish-aligned opposition forces captured Manbij from Kurdish-led groups backed by the United States, underscoring the fractured state of the country even after Assad's departure. Meanwhile, Russia announced that Assad had been granted political asylum, though Kremlin officials declined to disclose his location. President Vladimir Putin reportedly has no plans to meet with the ousted leader, so they say. Damascus was relatively calm today as life cautiously resumed. While many shops and public institutions remained closed, civilian traffic returned to the streets, though public transportation was unavailable. Long lines formed outside bakeries and food stores, and celebrations persisted in public squares. The fall of Assad, a longtime ally of Iran and Hezbollah, has been met with mixed reactions internationally. While Israel welcomed his ousting, concerns remain over what comes next for the region. The collapse of Assad's regime has also exposed the limits of Russia's influence in the Middle East. Observers note that losing its only ally in the region has weakened Russia's standing, potentially complicating its position in future negotiations, including those related to Ukraine. Assad's rapid ousting marks a significant shift in the balance of power in Syria and the broader Middle East. Meanwhile, we've learned that on the day that Assad fell, the US military launched dozens of airstrikes against Islamic State targets in central Syria. US Central Command announced it struck over 75 targets using multiple US Air Force assets, including B-52s, F-15s, and A-10s. The targets included ISIS leaders, operatives, and camps. No senior Islamic State leaders have been reported killed. The strike took place just 1 day after Syrian Democratic Forces warned that Islamic State would take advantage of the faltering efforts by Assad's now defunct Syria Arab Army. Assad had been battling a host of insurgent and terror groups since his brutal crackdown on civilian dissent during the beginning of the so-called Arab Spring in 2011. Assad's regime was responsible for imprisoning and murdering hundreds of thousands of civilians during that period. Backed by Russia, Iran, Lebanese Hezbollah, and a host of Iranian-backed militias from Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Qatar, and other countries, Assad's beleaguered forces were able to beat back opposition groups to northern and eastern Syria before the rebels' latest offensive. The US is working with several other countries in the Middle East to prevent chemical weapons possessed by the Assad regime from falling into the wrong hands. The US and its allies are concerned that the collapse of the Syrian army and other security forces and the chaos engulfing the country will allow terrorist groups to seize dangerous weapons held by the former Assad regime. The regime used chemical weapons against Syrian civilians in 2013, violating the red line that President Barack Obama had set a year earlier when discussing what would trigger US military intervention. Over the past 48 hours, the Israeli Air Force has conducted strikes against dozens of Syrian military bases, arms depots and facilities that were part of Syria's chemical weapons and ballistic missile programs. President Joe Biden laid out US policy regarding the crisis in Syria for the remaining 43 days of his administration in a speech yesterday. Biden said he will speak to Middle East leaders in the coming days and send senior U.S. officials to the region to discuss the situation. We will engage with all Syrian groups to establish a transition towards an independent, sovereign Syria that serves all Syrians, Biden said. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.